Preparations for Atlanta. Olympic Diaries starting in 15 minutes on BBC One.
And with a reminder that BBC One's programmes are running 10 minutes late tonight, here's the news now with Michael Burke.
Northern Ireland's loyalists have called for demonstrations across the province after a day-long confrontation with police over a parade at Portadown. A 70-year-old sailor's home 4 months after being given up for dead. And if Wimbledon's not won by a seed, I'm a Dutchman. Good evening. There's been a tense standoff for most of the day between thousands of Protestant Orangemen and police just outside Portadown in County Armagh. The RUC's chief constable had banned the Orange Order marching on their traditional route through a Catholic area of the town. Several hundred police, backed by 2 battalions of troops, stopped the marchers. There have been scuffles, but no serious trouble so far. Leaders of the Orange Order have called for protests across the province.
The day has seen a standoff. A country lane jammed with loyalists wanting to parade through a nationalist area, faced with an equally determined wall of police. Any skirmishing across the countryside had been discouraged by half a mile of barbed wire coiled through the fields by the army in the early hours of the morning. As the Orange Lodge marched its banners to Drumcree Church on the outskirts of Portadown, 1,000 police were in position, with the army on standby nearby. After the service, with drums beating, the loyalists descended the hill to find their desired route firmly blocked by police Land Rovers. The situation remained relatively calm, with the odd burst of abuse from the crowd. No one gave an inch. Then, as can happen, a drunk lurched through the cordon, triggering several minutes of scuffling and shoving, with stones and the odd rock hurled from the cemetery. One flag waver was hauled off. And hastily getting into riot gear, the police imposed order. There were appeals for calm from several speakers, all interlaced with calls for a determined stand by the loyalists until they're granted the right to march where they want.
Oh, they are remaining here until whatever obstruction there is on the road is removed. And Harold Gracie, the district master, said, whether it takes a day, a week or a month, that he and his brethren are going to continue here.
The desire to march a few hundred yards down a street in Portadown has grown into an event vested with much symbolism. And although there have only been a few minor incidents so far, there is much tension. The crowd has grown all evening, and within the last hour, several thousand marchers have joined, increasing the loyalists' defiance and determination. With numbers growing late this evening, the loyalists seem determined to stay put, and no one is prepared to give way. Kate Adey, BBC News, Portadown.
A team from the International War Crimes Tribunal has begun excavating the site of a suspected mass grave outside the Bosnian town of Srebrenica. Thousands of Muslim men have been missing since Srebrenica fell to the Bosnian Serb army almost exactly a year ago.
For the first time, investigators are preparing to uncover a suspected mass grave. Their work up to now has been to find where bodies are buried. Now they're starting the somber task of uncovering them by painstakingly removing the topsoil and mapping what evidence there is lying on the surface. Local workers have been hired to do the digging under the supervision of the investigating officials, who are determined to establish, as best they can, what happened to the thousands who vanished when Srebrenica fell.
We wish to find out, in the process of investigation and examination of the remains, will determine what sex the people are, what age they are, how they were killed, patterns of injuries they might sustain, and how they are identified.
The first anniversary of the collapse of the Muslim-held enclave around Srebrenica comes later this week. It was refugees fleeing the town and the surrounding countryside who first told of mass executions. Then eyewitnesses who'd managed to escape told of their experiences. This is just one of a dozen such sites that are to be investigated over the next 3 months. It's been described as one of the smaller ones. However, it's already been established that it holds its share of horrors. Bob Simpson, BBC News, near Srebrenica.
The Northern Ireland Secretary, Sir Patrick Mayhew, is standing down as an MP at the next general election. Sir Patrick, who's 66, has played a key role in the Northern Ireland peace process. He's represented Tunbridge Wells in Kent for 22 years, with a majority of more than 17,000. The Ministry of Defence is to back a cancer screening programme for hundreds of former workers at the Royal Dockyard at Chatham in Kent. An independent study revealed that a third of the yard's employees who worked on refitting and refuelling nuclear submarines may have been exposed to high levels of radiation.
Nuclear submarines were repaired and refitted at Chatham over a period of 3 decades. They provided work for thousands at the dockyard, but there are fears they also put the workers at risk. The report commissioned by the local council says the Chatham workers were exposed to some of the highest radiation levels in the UK, in some cases 8 times higher than similar workers in America. Tim Robson died last year, one of the dockyard's cancer victims. He campaigned for 5 years for cancer screening. His widow, who carried on the fight, welcomes the MOD announcement.
I'm very, very pleased. I know that my husband would see this as a great victory for all the campaigning that he did and all the other ex-dockyard workers over the last 5 to 7 years.
Up to 3,000 former dockyard workers could now be screened. The MOD say they expect very few cancer cases to emerge, but campaigners believe the screening could save lives. Valerie Jones, BBC News.
The Ministry of Defence has confirmed that a man wanted for questioning about an IRA attack in Germany is a former British soldier. 31-year-old Michael Robert Dixon served in the army until 1988. Police investigating the mortar attack at Osnabrück believe he may now be in Northern Ireland, and an international arrest warrant has been issued. The Polish Prime Minister has apologised to the Jewish community for the massacre of 40 refugees by a mob at the end of the Second World War. A group of Polish Jews who'd survived the Nazi death camps were murdered when they tried to return to their homes. The massacre in the southern town of Kielce led to the emigration of many Polish Jews who'd survived the Holocaust.
Lined up in front of Holocaust survivors, leaders of the Polish church and state asked for forgiveness for the worst pogrom in recent European history. In July 1946, right after the Holocaust, 42 Jewish people were murdered here in the southern Polish town of Kielce by an anti-Semitic mob. Men, women and children who'd survived the Nazi camps and come home were beaten to death by their fellow Poles. The worst of many such attacks, it was a turning point. Most of the remaining Polish Jews fled the country their families had lived in for centuries. Even today, they say Kielce is a black spot on the face of the earth.
I'm speaking not about the actual killers, but of the thousands who knew, who heard, who even saw what happened in Kielce and who in effect acquiesced to the crime.
Harking back to 1,000 years of shared history, Polish leaders ask for reconciliation now. But for many in the Jewish diaspora, it'll take more than such ceremonies to overcome the bitterness of the more recent past. Sancha Berg, BBC News, Kielce.
The unseeded Dutchman Richard Krajicek has won the men's singles championship at Wimbledon. He beat the American Mal Washington in straight sets to claim his first Grand Slam title.
Anyone who predicted that these two players would reach the final should be immediately consulted about next Saturday's winning lottery numbers. Such were the odds against either competing in tennis's greatest showpiece. And given the weather at this year's Wimbledon, you'd have got a pretty good price against anyone being stupid enough to dispense with one layer of clothing, let alone the lot. But one young lady did, to general amusement. An act of folly, no doubt, but one which eased the tension for both players. And it was Richard Krajicek's supporters who were able to bask in an uninhibited display of block-busting hitting from their man as he quickly took a stranglehold on the first set. Washington, who had the majority of the crowd's backing, was a man flailing vainly in an onrushing torrent. The set was swept away from him in barely half an hour. Soon after, the first of several interruptions for rain gave Washington the chance to reassess his approach. And for a while in the second set, he suggested he might have found the resources for a fight back. But always there was the withering Krajcek serve, utterly unforgiving, usually unanswerable. It gave him the second set 6-4. Washington was just overpowered by an opponent who, on the day, had found the delicacy of touch to complement awesome power. Fittingly, it was his crushing forehand that ultimately settled the issue.
I was unbelievably happy, and then when I did it, I thought, is the match really over? For a split second, I thought, am I making a fool out of myself now by going... It was really but then, yeah, nobody started laughing too much, so I thought I won anyway.
Even in a Wimbledon shorn of so many star names so early, the first Dutchman to win a Grand Slam title stands out as a truly worthy champion. Kevin Geary, BBC News, Wimbledon.
A lone British yachtsman who disappeared during his third solo voyage round the world has arrived home. Les Powles, who's 70, left New Zealand for Britain on Boxing Day, but he was given up for dead 4 months ago after all contact with him was lost. He arrived back in Hampshire last night, despite capsizing over Cape Horn and almost running out of food.
Solitaire by name, solitary existence by fate. The last time anyone heard from Les Powles was in March. The 70-year-old was on his third round-the-world voyage when all contact was lost. His friends had given him up for dead. In fact, all that Les lost was his radio and, over the next 4 months, several pounds in weight. Not able to reach land, his biggest problem was water.
Well, I was down to 5 gallons and I'm about 4,000 miles from the nearest land. And then for 2 days I had monsoons. It poured down and it was just like having a tap, you know. And I filled up all my containers in 2 days. So from rationing myself to 2 cups of tea a day, I'm washing my socks in fresh water, you know, unheard of.
Les left Cyprus for New Zealand in September 1993. He started his return trip home on Boxing Day last year, but in March he capsized just off Cape Horn, losing radio contact. Despite being knocked unconscious, he recovered and carried on to the Falkland Islands, but heavy storms prevented him landing there to pick up more supplies. He arrived back in Lymington last night, making human contact for the first time in 27 weeks, ironically with one of his oldest friends.
I went out for a sail in my boat down the Lymington River, saw a boat coming the other way, and saw a quarantine flag up and thought, hey, who's this? Somebody coming back from somewhere. Sure enough, it was Solitaire, Les Powles.
Les says he's had enough of sailing around the world. He says he'll get giddy if he tries it once more. That will please many of his friends who feared that this was one ancient mariner who'd never drop anchor again. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News.
And the main news again. As many as 4,000 loyalists have gathered in Portadown tonight after an all-day confrontation with police over a parade through a Catholic area. That's it from the newsroom this weekend. Good night.
Hello, good evening. We are going to see a change in the weather over the next few days, losing the cool northwesterly and the sunshine and showers. In fact, today really was typical of that. Lots of sunshine for Jersey and rather stormy for Hurstmonceux in Sussex. Now, even through this evening, there have been a few showers left for parts of southeast England, more especially though for northern England. They have been quite heavy, but they are showing signs of easing now. I think they should have died out altogether by about midnight. Now, the reason for that is we've got a ridge of high pressure toppling across the country tonight and, in fact, covering much of the country tomorrow. But then we are seeing these weather fronts gradually bringing in some cloud and more persistent rain during the latter part of the day. But tonight, most places becoming dry, just a few spots of rain for northeast Scotland, a fair amount of cloud. But for breaks in central Scotland, for the glens there, it could become a chilly 3 degrees, so pretty chilly there. But elsewhere, 9 or 10 degrees, that's 50 Fahrenheit. To start the week, a lot of dry and bright weather. There will be some sunshine around, but the cloud will bubble up enough to give 1 or 2 light showers, I think, through parts of southwest England, West Wales and Northern Ireland during the morning. And then that more persistent band of cloud and rain pushing in from the west during the afternoon. But I think the rain generally light and patchy for much of the afternoon. On the east, quite bright and really feeling quite pleasant, just a light west or northwesterly breeze with similar temperatures to today's 18 or 20 degrees. For Tuesday then, a lot of cloud around, some rain spreading east and then really staying quite dull and damp for many western areas, but some dry weather coming through in the east. Good night.